Christine and Mark had said their vows 4 years ago. Back then, they started off in a cramped little one-room place, tucked away on the edge of the city. But a couple of years down the line, they managed to upgrade to a proper apartment. Around that time, Mark's folks, looking for a slower pace and a bit more breathing room, packed up and moved to the countryside, leaving their son in charge of the family home. Christine, whose job had her working erratic shifts and the occasional weekend, wasn't one to sit still. Instead of staying cooped up at home, she'd either be powering through a workout at the gym or grabbing coffee with friends. Things between her and Mark seemed easy, calm, even effortless. That is, until one ordinary morning changed the rhythm of their lives. They were heading out together, ready to start the day, when they found a shiny new car parked smack in front of their driveway. "Well, at least they left a number," Mark muttered, eyeing the note tucked under the windshield and glancing at his watch. Clearly in a rush, he wasted no time dialing the number. Within minutes, a young man came jogging out from the driveway next door. Clearly still in college by the look of him, he moved his car with a flustered apology and then made his way over. "Sorry for the odd first impression," he said, catching his breath. "I just moved in yesterday. Name's Alex." Mark, eager to get going, gave a quick nod and introduced both himself and Christine. Then he hopped into the car. But Christine's eyes lingered on the newcomer a bit too long. And Alex, catching that look, smiled slightly, as if sensing this wasn't the last he'd see of her. Time passed after that unexpected encounter. Weeks, maybe even months. Then something curious started happening. Christine, who used to be out and about on weekends, suddenly became a homebody. When asked, she'd say work was wearing her down, and she'd rather relax at home with a blanket and a movie. So every time Mark wrapped up his shift, there she was, waiting. But one day, something threw off the pattern. The electricity suddenly went out at Mark's workplace, right in the middle of the workday. Due to the outage and idleness, everyone was sent home early. Mark entered the house a full 4 hours ahead of schedule. As soon as he stepped in, Christine ran out into the hallway, her eyes wide open, scared, as if she'd seen a ghost. She peppered him with questions, asking if everything was okay. Her voice was a little raised, and her smile was a little strained. While he calmly explained the whole blackout situation, her entire body seemed to tighten with unease. And then the doorbell rang. Mark hadn't even had time to take off his shoes, but instinctively he turned and answered it. And there, standing on the doorstep, was Alex. Only this time, his usually bright grin had faded into something more reserved, hesitant even. He looked like he hadn't expected Mark to be there at all. "What can I do for you?" Mark asked, his brows slightly furrowed. I just, Alex stuttered, clearly thrown off. "I wanted to—" Before he could finish, Christine cut in, her tone overly cheery. "Out of flour again," she said with a forced laugh. "Hold on, I'll grab some." Without missing a beat, she hurried into the kitchen, scooped a glass full of flour, and handed it over with a bright smile. "Thanks for stopping by." Alex muttered something that might have been gratitude, awkwardly ducked his head, and slipped away toward his apartment. Mark watched him go, one eyebrow raised. "That's it? Do you work in a grocery store now or what?" "Oh, come on," Christine said with a quick chuckle, brushing off the comment. "Of course not," she rushed to explain. "I was baking a Charlotte once, and the smell made it all the way to the stairwell. I ran into him while taking out the trash, and he asked for the recipe. I guess he must have run into trouble trying it again." Before Mark could ask anything else, she shifted the conversation. "By the way, when are you finally going to fix that nightstand door in the living room?" she asked casually, like nothing unusual had happened. The way she swerved the topic so abruptly only made the whole thing feel more ridiculous. "Really? A college guy hanging around trying to perfect apple pie recipes? Sure, not impossible, but odd. Especially when there's a perfectly good bakery down the street." After that strange encounter, Alex seemed to fade from their lives completely. Mark stopped thinking about him, and their days went back to their usual rhythm. Then came another afternoon. Mark got home from work, just as Christine was coming in too. It was supposed to be her day off. "Where have you been?" he asked. "Just stepped out to toss the trash," she said, eyes darting away for a moment. "Been home all day otherwise." Mark didn't say much. Instead, He walked into the living room and his gaze landed on that same cabinet with the busted door. "It's about time I handled this," he muttered. He grabbed his toolbox and got to work, completely absorbed in the task. So much so that he forgot he had meant to call a colleague about a pressing matter. "Honey, you got the time?" he asked without looking up. Christine was standing nearby, quietly watching him work, lost in her own head. It took her a moment to even hear the question. When he glanced up at her, she blinked, then turned to check the clock. Only, there was nothing there. She looked at the wrong wall first, something that shouldn't have happened, not in the place they'd lived for years. Then she spun toward the other side of the room, her face frozen in confusion. Lately, she'd been more absent-minded than usual, and this was something Mark couldn't just laugh off. How could she not remember where the wall clock was, especially when she claimed to spend so much time at home? That moment lodged itself in his mind. Something was off. A growing sense of unease settled over Mark. He couldn't shake the thought that Christine was hiding something. The way she acted on her days off, how vague she'd been about where she'd gone. None of it sat right. So, when her next day off rolled around, Mark quietly arranged to take time off as well. Around midday, he came home unannounced. The apartment was empty. Christine, who had insisted she'd be home all day, was nowhere to be found. His pulse quickened. Then, almost instinctively, he thought of Alex. That young neighbor had all but disappeared from his thoughts, until now. Mark made his way upstairs and rang Alex's doorbell. He waited. Seconds passed. Then minutes. He could hear faint shuffling from inside. Someone was definitely home. But no one came to the door. He rang again and again. Nothing. Frustrated, he took out his phone and called Christine. But before the first ring even ended, a familiar sound echoed from within the apartment. Her ringtone coming from behind Alex's door. Frustrated and fed up, Mark shouted, "There's no use hiding." Open the door. After a tense pause, the door creaked open. Alex stood there, pale and visibly shaken, his hair a mess, his expression guilt-ridden. Mark didn't waste time. Pointing toward one of the rooms, he asked, "Is she in there?" and stepped inside, without waiting for permission. The layout of the apartment mirrored their own, except for one odd detail. The clock in the living room hung on the opposite wall. That small difference hit him like a punch. It all made sense now. Christine had been here so often, she'd confused his home with this one. Even her momentary lapse about where the clock was, that hadn't been forgetfulness. It was familiarity. But Mark didn't storm in with rage. He found her on the sofa, hunched over, her face hidden. Her shirt was inside out and backward, like she'd gotten dressed in a blind panic. She didn't look up when he entered. Quietly, he said, "It's over. I won't fight, I won't yell, but there's no going back from this." His voice was firm, unshakable. "Go home. Pack your things." Christine finally lifted her head, eyes wide with a pleading sort of fear. She opened her mouth, perhaps to say she had nowhere else to go, but the look on Mark's face stopped her. Silently, desperately, she turned to Alex, hoping for a word, a gesture, anything that might offer her shelter in the storm she'd created. But all he gave was a slow shake of his head. That single gesture hit harder than any insult. Tears spilled as Christine walked out and back into the apartment that was no longer her home. She packed in silence, not knowing where to go next. The affair, once wrapped in secrecy and thrill, had collapsed under the weight of something as trivial as a wall clock. One careless mistake that shattered everything. Mark filed for divorce immediately. Christine spent the following months drifting between friends' couches, eventually landing in a small rented room in a shared apartment. The bitter twist. Now she was surrounded by male neighbors she had no interest in, stuck in a communal life she never imagined for herself. She grieved not just for the marriage, but for the comfort, the routine, and the quiet companionship she once took for granted. Looking back, it wasn't the passion she missed. It was the peace. And peace, she learned too late, is what love feels like when it's real. cheating secrets podcasts like me.